Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into the life of Baz Bahadur Chand, a king who really did forge a golden age for his Himalayan kingdom. But his story, well, it's one of incredible ambition and strategic genius, but also, ultimately, a really tragic fall from grace.
So this is really the central question of his entire life, isn't it? It's this dramatic journey from a hidden prince, an orphan, to a legendary monarch. His life is just this incredible arc of triumph and tragedy, brilliance, and, brutality.
So, let's start at the beginning, in a Kumaon court that was, frankly, riddled with chaos and conspiracy. To really get a handle on the king he became, you first have to understand the turbulent world he was born into. It really sets the stage for a hero you'd never expect. Okay, so his story kicks off with some serious bloodshed. His own father, Prince Nila Gusain, was murdered by a corrupt trio of nobles who were pulling all the strings. This put the infant prince's life in grave danger. A loyal maid actually smuggled him to safety, where he was raised in total secret by a priest's wife. He was known only by the simple name Baja. Baja, a really humble beginning for the man who would one day become the great Baz Bahadur.
So years later, the new king, Maharaja Baz Chand, is facing a succession crisis of his own. He has no heir. He starts hearing these rumors of a surviving prince and personally goes to find him. After swearing a really solemn oath to the boy's foster mother that he would be safe, Baz Chand adopted the young Baz Gusain, brought him to the palace, and officially declared him the crown prince.
All right, so now he's king, and what's the first thing on his to-do list? He immediately turns his attention to a critical task, getting back his kingdom's most valuable piece of territory. This was his first great test as a ruler, and how he handled it would define his entire reign. You know, the key to Kumaon's prosperity was this region called the Terai. Think of it as the economic engine room of the whole kingdom, fertile, prosperous lowlands. But during all that earlier chaos, it had been snatched up by rivals. For the new king, getting it back was priority number one.
And this number right here, this says it all, 9 lakh. That was the estimated annual revenue from the Terai, an absolutely massive fortune back then. This economic powerhouse was exactly why the region was so fiercely contested, and for Baz Bahadur, getting it back was completely non-negotiable. So instead of just rushing into a messy battle, he pulls off this masterful 3-step plan. First, he gets an audience with the incredibly powerful Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan in Delhi, and he shows up with lavish gifts. Then he forges this really shrewd military alliance, pledging Kumaoni's support against a mutual rival in exchange for Mughal help in the Terai. And guess what? With their combined forces, the plan worked perfectly. And for his valor in that campaign, Shah Jahan granted him the title Bahadur, which means brave. From that point on, he was BazBahadurChand. And to really cement his control over those recaptured lands, he founded a brand new town right in the heart of the Terai, naming it, of course, Bazpur. But you know, a guy with this much ambition wasn't about to stop at the Terai. Now that he had secured his kingdom's economic heartland, he set his sights on the formidable Himalayan territories to the north, a challenge that no Kumaoni king had ever really dared to attempt before. And what's fascinating is that he was driven by two things at once, piety and power. As a deeply religious man, he was genuinely angry about reports that local Tibetan authorities were robbing pilgrims on their way to the sacred Mount Kailash. But at the same time, he also recognized a massive strategic opportunity to seize control of vital trade routes. In what was a truly historic feat, he didn't just send his army. No, he personally led them into Tibetan territory. He captured the heavily fortified town of Taklakot and seized control of these crucial mountain passes. For the first time, he was able to ensure safe passage for pilgrims and establish Kumaon's authority in the high Himalayas. His reign was also marked by just how ruthlessly he subjugated his rivals. When the kingdom of Garhwal attacked while he was away in Tibet, he returned with a vengeance, driving their army all the way back to their capital. And when he found out the ancient Courtier dynasty had helped them, he showed zero mercy. He destroyed their fort and completely extinguished their line to make sure Kumaon's dominance was never questioned again.
But after decades of glory, the very king who built this empire began to dismantle his own legacy. His final years are this dark, paranoid chapter that stands as a tragic counterpoint to the golden age he created.
There's this Kumaoni proverb, and it translates to, when one becomes 80 years old, his wisdom is destroyed. It just perfectly captures the tragedy of his later years. As he got older, his once sharp mind really began to erode, and it was replaced by this deep, consuming paranoia.
He fell under the influence of this manipulative court Brahmin who convinced the now paranoid king that a totally bizarre rice test could determine loyalty. A courtier would touch one of two piles of rice, and the Brahmin would just declare them loyal or a traitor. It was a complete and utter fraud, but in his fragile state, the king actually believed it.
So based on this sham test, the king executed hundreds of his most loyal officials and servants. It was a massacre. Finally, this incredibly brave attendant named Sundar Bandari cleverly exposed the test as a fraud to the king himself. And while Baz Bahadur realized his error and punished the Brahmin, the court was terrified, and the king was just consumed by guilt and suspicion.
He abdicated the throne at age 80, but found absolutely no peace. In his paranoia, he dismissed every last one of his old servants, terrified that they would try to kill him. Just 2 years later, the great king died alone and uncared for, a truly painful end to such a glorious life. So how do we even remember a king like this? A man who was both a celebrated hero and a feared tyrant? Someone who brought a golden age but ended his reign in a storm of paranoia and bloodshed. Let's try to distill his really complex legacy. Well, these 5 points really encapsulate his story. First, he was the empire builder. Second, the strategic diplomat. Third, he was the defender of faith. But fourth, you also have the ruthless consolidator. And finally, number 5, he's the cautionary tale, a tragic warning about the fragility of even the greatest minds. And all of this leaves us with one final, really thought-provoking question. Was the terror of his last years just a tragic aberration of old age, or was that capacity for cruelty always there, just waiting, the dark side of the same ambition that made him so great? It's a question that makes the Lion of Kumaon truly unforgettable.